Hello, this is Saul Luckman. I'm the voice in the dark apparently today because my avatar is not showing up here on Zoom. And I have the great pleasure and honor to be with Eileen McKusick, who's written a couple of books you might be familiar with. One is Tuning the Human Biofield, and that was a fantastic book that came out several years ago and won a fairly large award. And she followed that up with Electric Body. What's the full title on that? Electric Body?
Electric health.
Electric Health, right? Very fascinating. It's kind of a branching off into other self-help strategies in combination with the biofield concepts. And so she's really pioneered a lot of our understanding about the nature of the human energy field and how we can interface with it for not just healing, but things like manifestation and harmonizing our relationship with our environment, our businesses, our finances. I mean, really, there's really no limit to what can be done when we begin understanding ourselves as much larger energetic creatures than just this small circumscribed physical body. So, Eileen, I wanted to welcome you to this conversation. I know we were going to go back and forth and talk about what we're both up to, but it was really nice to be able to give you that introduction that you absolutely deserve. So,
Nice. Thanks so much, Saul. Well, I can give you a little bit of an introduction as well. Saul Luckman is the creator of an amazing process that completely changed my life. Potentiation. He's the author of a book called Potentiate Your DNA and several other books, and you have a new book out too, which I hope that you get to talk about. Saul's process is a fascinating one that uses tuning forks and sound healing and sound to help reprogram the template that we are through four different activations. That I have actually solved. I've had almost every single one of my biofield tuning instructors has gone through all four of those. And I really encourage the people around me to. And I will say that your work combined with tuning has been incredibly liberating for me. So we're both kind of here doing the same thing, I think, helping people with sound to expand into our potential as humans.
oh, I love that. Yes, I mean, I don't know how many times I've suggested your work. I hesitate to use the word recommend because it makes me sound like I should have an MD after my name or something. But I've shared your work with so many people on my blogs and on the Regenetics Method forum, and people come forward very often and ask what else they could be doing maybe on themselves because Regenetics is a kind of one and done process. You do an activation and then it rolls out over a period of time, and you're supposed to sort of go about your business and live your life, but some people want to be more active in that process of becoming. And I mean, really, biofield tuning has always been at the very top of my list for suggestions that people can do, that something people can do that is really resonant with Regenetics. It's almost like they're yin and yang in a way, and that's really, really cool to see.
Yeah. And what's neat is that your work came into my life when I was writing Tuning the Human Biofield. Yours and Brendan Murphy's book, The Grand Illusion. You guys were both, and now Brendan actually became he is a Regenetics practitioner. So, and that was all the way back in like 2013, I think that we all connected then. So,
I remember that little constellation. I mean, that his book is really great too. I mean, to bring him into the discussion, and he's been going strong with Regenetics for, yeah, for all this time. I mean, he's doing it very regularly and has, had a lot of amazing testimonials with clients and that sort of thing. So yeah, I love what he's done. Kind of made it, given it his own flavor, which I always encourage people to do so that he can kind of put his stamp on the way he presents it and that sort of thing. But it's Regenetics.
yeah, fundamentally. Well, I think, Saul, you need to give a good description of what regenetics is for people who don't know. Can your elevator synopsis of the process?
Well, yeah, I can do that. I mean, to sort of tie it into what you're doing, I mean, we both realize that we have this energy field, right? And that It's got a lot of different names, and there are lots of different ideas that are attached to it. But the way I ended up breaking down my understanding of the energy field is that there's really two fields that people talk about, and very often they confuse them. And I was guilty for giving sort of confusing nomenclature to it, because when I first, years and years ago, before while I was writing the first book on regenetics, Conscious Healing, I called the activation that I was presenting potentiation electromagnetic repatterning. And I will say, I believe it actually does do a lot of repatterning in the electromagnetic fields of the body. But what I was actually talking about was the hyperdimensional or torsion field that gives rise to the electromagnetic fields. So when people talk about the torus around the body, the Institute of Heart Math, and the electromagnetic field, the electric body, and all of that, very often they're talking about the measurable energy fields that largely pump out of the heart and create a kind of toroid wing shape around the body. And there's so much that could be said about that, and it's a wonderful thing to study and to learn how to interface with. My research suggests very strongly that there is a hyperdimensional 4D or higher level of energy, that's subtle energy, that would be your prana or chi, kundalini, orgone, at that level of very subtle energy, that is what gives rise to the bioenergy field that is electromagnetic, that we can measure with our normal equipment. I mean, a lot of people have, over the years have used different types of equipment, like Valerie Hunt used an EEG machine to register, what might have been the subtle domain. There was a Japanese scientist, Hiroshi Motoyama, who was able to actually measure light being emitted by the chakras of these yoga masters and stuff like that. So people have actually been able, there's of course Kirlian photography and other things too, where people have been able to get glimpses into this other field that I'm talking about. What fascinated me most in my research, which I was conducting when I was really sick and I was trying to get well, I had an autoimmune illness, was that there seemed to be this very intimate relationship between DNA, specifically DNA and RNA for that matter, at the nucleotide level, these nucleotide bases, uracil and that kind of thing. These related very closely to this energy field, and there was also this massive linguistic component to what I was picking up on. It was as if the in the beginning truly was the word, and that some consciousness spoke the world, including our biology, into existence. And when that happened, we got this energy field connected to the DNA, and the DNA is how we interface with the energy field. So I realized that if I could figure out a way to use sound to stimulate the DNA could then tell the subtle energy field how to repattern itself and get rid of any distortions or glitches in its programming. It was like a defrag for the subtle energy field. And when that happens, that energy then flows back into what we perceive of as the material realm, including DNA and RNA and the electromagnetic fields, and it begins sort of epigenetically at that point correcting dysfunctions. That was long-winded. Did any of that make any sense
Yeah,
whatsoever?
but it makes total sense to me, and I think anybody, who wants to listen to you and I will absolutely make sense to them. And it's interesting, because it's been a long time since I read your book, and the whole idea of the language coding of DNA and then our language, and the way that you put together, like, I think to me it's sort of miraculous and mysterious that you were able to come up with the system, because it's kind of complex. It involves speaking particular sounds while thinking other ones, right? And I'm just so curious, like, what was the aha that you had, that kind of where all this fell into place for you and you figured it out?
Yeah, I don't know that there was a single aha. I mean, you went through develop the whole process of developing your work, and as I've understood that story, you had students, you had people you were working with, they were bouncing ideas back at you. You might have had some people who played some kind of mentor role, who were giving you little like breadcrumbs, and so all of this was coming together more and more. And then when you started doing it, I remember when you were like learning how to kind of scrape the energy into the different areas with the tuning fork. And I'm like, that's fascinating. How would you even like come up with like that methodology? That was always so bizarre to me and wonderful in a way, because I could feel it when I've done it recently. I mean, you can feel this energy. I mean, it's really, really bizarre.
It is
Anyway,
bizarre.
but to use like the tuning fork as like a fork and pull that energy food into a different portion of the or part of your plate. I mean, it's fascinating to me. But my process was born out of desperation because I was really sick and I had tried all of these different energetic modalities and spent a lot of money and really had gotten almost nowhere, just gone in circles or gotten worse. And then I started doing allergy elimination technique. I experienced it as a client with somebody who was doing her own version of that. People might have heard of Pad's allergy elimination technique in AET. And then there's something called Bioset, which a chiropractor named Ellen Cutler developed out of that. And then my teacher had developed her own way of doing it. And so I ended up training with her and then spent a little over a year working with a whole bunch of clients, and that I began doing kinesiology on them because that was part of what we were doing in the allergy clearing process. And then there was a kind of acupressure technique that you did to initiate kind of a clearing through the nervous system so that people would begin, in a sense, or in theory, resetting their relationship to something they were having problems with, like sugar. And so you could reset the nervous system's overreaction to sugar, and then maybe you could get away with eating it. That was the theory, and it worked. It worked enough to be very helpful for a lot of people, but then it ran into a kind of wall when you got into very serious autoimmune types of illnesses like mine and other people's that I was working with. And I was working with some people who were just they had these were the rejects of not only the allopathic system but of the holistic system, people who just didn't know where to go and they were really grasping at straws at that point. And I was too, really, in my own way, even though I was out there being the wounded healer working with people. So I had this kind of gift wrapped opportunity to do thousands and thousands of kinesiological tests on all of these people with all of these bizarre issues and sensitivities and problems with heavy metals and blah 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 blah. And I took very meticulous records of all of this research and I began looking at the patterns and that sort of thing. And so a whole bunch of different ideas emerged from these data sets. I mean, I felt like I was doing some kind of, doctoral program, and I had just come out of a doctoral program in literature. So, I mean, I had some experience with looking at things with that kind of mind. One of the things that emerged from this research was that people are not the same, that there are different energy families of people. We think that we all have like the same, like the root chakra means this and the heart chakra means this, and it relates to these organs. And the simple answer is no, that's not how it works. That we have several different groups of people sharing this planet, and they look the same, but they are not the same, and their personalities are not the same. They have different tendencies, different susceptibilities to different kinds of illness. It's amazing. I mean, yes, they can marry, they can have children, and all of that. They're human in that sense, but it's like we have different human families, as it were. So that was fascinating to see that emerge from all of this testing. And then I began doing a lot of testing on DNA and genetic structure, different parts of DNA and how DNA related to different dysfunctions. And ultimately, I was adding testing for different sounds, for vowels, for consonants, other different concepts that related to sound healing that I knew about, radionics, other things like that that were that I had some knowledge of that I could test against various concepts. And out of that testing emerged this very clear picture that the five nucleotides of DNA and RNA, are basically key to the five vowels in English. And the five vowels in English are essentially a distillation of all the major vowels. So that you don't have the subtlety that you have in a language like Hebrew that has many more vowels, for example. But you have the distillation of it. William Henry made a point like this a long time ago. He's an author who wrote about esoteric subjects, and he wrote about things like the language of the birds, which is the green language, the alchemical language. And it must be this type of language of vowels that has been used for time immemorial to heal and transform the body. So this is the language of alchemists. And he said that basically the language of the birds became the language of the bards when it translated into English. And that was a reference to Shakespeare, of course. And the idea was that English was because it's now the lingua franca, that it was positioning itself as the distillation point for all of these other languages in the world. And so the five vowels are really the distillation of those primary creational vowel sounds from the beginning.
Wow. Okay, that's awesome. That's the first time that I've made that connection, and it makes sense, right? Because everything is fractal, and as within, so without. And language definitely, there's so much to it. So, okay, so keep going because I want to hear how they sort of came together, with what you noticed when you started playing with the vowels and the DNA.
Yeah, I mean, I blew myself out a couple of times, and that's how I realized how powerful they were. When I was just fooling around trying to figure things out. I also realized that we have this major energy rift down in what people think of as the second chakra area, the sex chakra, where we're just leaking energy out of this area. It's also where we take on energetically, where we take on parasites of a physical nature, but also maybe etheric parasites. And we could get into a discussion of Gnosticism and archons and all of this crazy stuff if we wanted to, but that's a whole other can of worms. Anyway, I began calling that the fragmentary body. That's what you also had identified in your own work, which was fascinating. I mean, you called it the slavery yoke, and you wrote about that in Tuning the Human Biofield. And people have found this concept of all the various concepts that I brought forward, this particular idea that we have this primordial duality principle embedded in our biology and in our energetics is probably the most fascinating to people. Maybe a close second would be the follow-up to that discussion is that actually you can heal it. You can seal that duality and move forward with your life without that like contrail on a plane leaking your energy into the cosmos.
Yeah, definitely. And that's interesting. I'm sorry, there's somebody right out my window revving their engine. That's why I keep muting myself.
It's about power.
It's just kind of a random thing at 5:30 here. But I in the beginning of my work with tuning forks, I had the C major scale, and they came with a really simple little instruction book back in 1996. Said use C on the root chakra, D on the second, E on the third, and so on. And the only fork that ever wore out in that set was the D fork of the sacral center. Because when I started really exploring and working with the energy of the sacral center, it was so messy, like in everybody. I'm like, this is the messiest center ever. Like, energy is spread across the field like peanut butter with everybody. And
I think you talked about like breaking the fork multiple times, or it just would stop ringing.
yeah, yeah, I went through this whole period of fork destruction, where where I was trying to see clients, teach classes, be a mom, and write my first book all at the same time. And needless to say, the book wasn't getting written, but I felt like I needed to keep seeing clients and I needed to keep teaching. And what ended up starting to happen was my primary fork that I was using, 174 hertz. This is like my field combing fork.
Hmm.
Started they started blowing. So originally I had one last me for a long time, my first one, and then after like, I don't know, a year, it kind of like started buzzing. And so I had another one made, and that one only lasted 6 months. And then I went through this period where then it would last 3 months, then 2 months, then 1 month, then 2 weeks, then just a few days. And then it got to the point where I picked one. I had to keep getting new ones because I kept destroying them. And I destroyed one within an hour of using it. And it was so strange. So, I mean, to this day, I don't really understand what force was in play, like my super conscious. Some part of me knew that the only way that I was going to stop seeing clients was if it was made impossible for me to do that. And the only way to do that was for my super conscious to destroy my forks. And so finally, I had no choice but to put the forks down and clear my schedule and go home and write, which is exactly what needed to happen in order for the book to get written. But what that led to was the creation of my own sort of special alloy, where the manufacturer at MetaVibe and I spent like a year and a half, and he created all these different alloys and different gauges and sent them to me. And the last man standing is the alloy that we use, which doesn't blow. Like the other ones. It's like superior, it's more flexible, and
That's
it makes a
cool.
great sound,
I
right?
have one of those forks, but just to let people know, I mean, this is the fork itself is massive, and the idea that they could be rendered ineffectual or they could kind of break just doing simple tuning work is wild. I mean, so
Wild.
that's kind of a crazy story.
It's a crazy story. It's a crazy story, and nobody's ever come back to me with any kind of explanation, of what might have happened. Because as soon as I finished writing the book and I went back to the forks, that whole phenomenon ended. It just ended, and then of course I got the new alloy, and then I haven't blown a fork. I'm hearing people wondering like, what does it mean to blow a fork? Essentially, what was happening was they were developing micro cracks in them that then made the structural integrity wouldn't produce a pure tone anymore. It would just buzz. In fact, I have a whole huge bucket full of forks that I destroyed in that time period, because it was crazy. So, but it kind of brings us back to this conversation with you in that, like, obviously, I did it, right? There's nothing else. There's no other factor in the equation except for me, which means that my human body has the capacity to deconstruct metal subconsciously, right? Like, so, and that just makes me wonder about the whole coding of the DNA, because it feels to me like what I call the slavery yoke and you call the fragmentary body is like a governor that stops us from expanding into our full potential as humans, right? And it feels like there's multiple gates and signal jammers and all kinds of stuff that have been programmed into us that limit us from what our true capabilities as humans actually are.
Oh, I love that. That was really eloquent. I couldn't agree more. I mean, I in fact had a similar experience. I had finished writing my first novel soon after becoming a father, and I had had the tendency to go back over it and pour over it and pour over it and hammer away at this. And this was just my very kind of stubborn left brain kind of almost, narcissistic approach to my creativity, where I had to control everything. And this was also at a point in time when, I was still in experiencing the regenetics activations, which a lot of people who have gone through this process have shared their own really wild stories having to do with their energetics and things that have happened in their environments and that they couldn't explain. And so what happened with me was I would go out to cafes and I would leave my family and I would go to work for no reason at that point in time, really, because it was more like a habit. I just felt like I needed to keep working on this book, forever and ever and ever. And so it got to where I could not turn on my computer. I couldn't turn it on. I could ask someone else to come and touch the button to turn it on, and it would turn on just fine. I could turn it off, but then I couldn't turn it on again. And this went on for quite a while. And it really forced me to just go home, be with
Getting
my
the message.
family, and stop working on the damn book. It was done.
Yeah, that's funny. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's really wild. So I'm going to agree with you completely that we have so much more to us in our energy field it is our consciousness. To me, to the extent that we have a mind, and we could talk about the ways that maybe we don't have a mind or how our minds have been taken over, but our energy field is the mind. The brain is a processor, it's a radio, it's a receiver. But that energy field out there, and I don't mean the electromagnetic field that we can measure, the subtle energy field to me is the mind. And what I was able to do with all of this kinesiology work was to map it out. And so, like in Potentiate Your DNA, I provide people with schematics so you can determine which energy family you belong to. And based on that information, you can determine what the structure of your mind is, looking at how it relates to your organ systems and your emotions and to the illness susceptibilities that you might have, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, well, that's so interesting because I also kind of map the mind. I just want to speak to the idea of the etheric body, what I call, I guess, the etheric body. Um, for the most part, just to keep the conversation simple, I talk about the electric nature of the field. I've done group distance sessions inside Faraday cages and been able to access, feel, manipulate, and
Yes,
have
yes.
an experience, right? So obviously there is an element that is absolutely not what we would call electromagnetic, that has instantaneous connectivity even through a Faraday cage.
Yes,
And
yes.
and so I refer to that as like the etheric body or the etheric template. Um,
I've
so
used that language too.
yeah, and it is important, like, but it's a whole, in a weird way, it's a whole other conversation. Like if I just say, oh, your body's electric and it's being, the heart and the torus, like that's graspable. Anything that has electric current has a magnetic field, like that's a good primary conversation. But taking it into the etheric, how healing works at a distance, the way that the mind is non-local ultimately, right? Because I can pull your mind, I can pull your
Sure.
field up right in front of me, so it has non-locality. There's like, that's a whole other kind of deeper conversation, right? That adds complexity to the equation, and there isn't really, I don't think that there's an easy way to talk about it, especially in English. Like I don't think sometimes English is not the best language when we start going into non-material, more esoteric concepts. I mean, at the end of the day, to me, it's very simple, but at the same time, it's already a leap for people to be like, oh, I have electric current. Oh, I have a magnetic field. And then you're like, oh, and then you've got another, like even more subtle body below that. Can be a bit much for the conversation. Subspace, right? Isn't that what they called it in Star Trek? Subspace.
Subspace, yeah, yeah. So you go through, warp drive is sort of this this travel into your fields in some ways. I mean, my conclusion is actually that the universe is mind, and that when we travel into the fields, we're traveling. I say in this new book of mine that I say this over and over. Well, the book is called Get Out of Here Alive, and the subtitle is Inner Alchemy and Immortality. And the whole principle is that you must go into the interior part of yourself, which is your mind and that field, And as you do, it opens up into what we perceive as the cosmos. And space is ultimately just your mind. This is really where all of this goes. And your mind is ultimately the mind of the multiverse. So as you grow into more and more of who you are, you get closer and closer to conflating with source.
Yeah.
And that's the journey. That's the journey.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, what a great little quick summary of of the journey. It is. And right, that's why I was talking when people are talking about raising their vibration or raising their consciousness. I'm like, you don't just go up. It's like you expand out in every direction into the totality of all that is, and you are that. But where most people they get snared up in their pain body and in these different signal jammers that stop you from having an experience. You can't expand when you're all knotted up, right? And I think that's what your work does and what my work does is literally untie so many of those knots so that people can expand into that totality and have that experience of oneness of expanded self concurrently with the little self, the
Yeah,
avatar.
right. Yeah, I mean, what I get into and get out of here alive, if I can just kind of segue into that a little bit because it relates to it. It's definitely, I'm calling it, it's unofficially book 3 on the Regenetics method because it ends up basically tying Regenetics into this discussion of inner alchemy. And there's a major tie-in. It's an important tie-in. There's a lot of clarification on how the fragmentary body came into being, how it works, how it siphons off the energy, the exact mechanism that it uses to do that. So, I mean, I don't want to, go into all of the minutia of that discussion, but what we're looking at is a scenario that a lot of different philosophers, shamans, seers, mystics over the millennia have perceived. It's that we are in some kind of adversarial relationship with the the power of this world as people. This is what the Gnostics were talking about. And they describe this power as a kind of false god who basically required sacrifice, child sacrifice in some cases, our obedience, our allegiance, and ultimately our energy. And the concept that I've been working with in Get Out of Here Alive grew out of my reading and studying of the work of an inner alchemist named John Kreiter. He's written a trilogy of books that start with one called the Magnum Opus, and I highly recommend his work. It's absolutely fascinating. So I was able to kind of take what I had done in terms of the Regenetics background research, all of the kinesiology, the mapping out of the mind, and then look at what he was doing and then put in several other pieces. And I got this kind of gestalt where I really grasped how we we've gotten to where we are in this scenario. And so basically the through line is that in the primordial past, we humans lived in what the Aborigines might call dream time, where we basically shared a massive collective unconscious. And we did not have a conscious mind in the sense that we have now. And it allowed for absolute miracles because the unconscious mind is the great powerhouse. This is why so much of Jung's work in alchemy and in archetypes is all about that mind and the way it can create kind of amazing things like, in your reality, because it's what brings things to life. So he has quotes that are to the effect that the things that you ignore and that stay in that world that need to come out, they will actually manifest in your reality as an event. I mean, it's just really profound. So we were talking about how the energy field can have these bizarre effects in our lives, sometimes in ways that we cannot explain. Well, this is what's going on. It's really coming out of the unconscious. That energy field is the unconscious that we're talking about. Then we went through a moment where we desired that humanity desired to experience another type of consciousness, basically. And we wanted more individuality. And what we did is we summoned a snake into our garden, just like in the biblical story. And that snake was a being from the realm of the unconscious, an apex predator being of a vast consciousness, vast intelligence. You might compare it to the mind flayer in Stranger Things. This being that shows up and is able to basically control people's minds. And so what happened was, is that in exchange for bottling up our unconscious creative ability, this incredibly powerful force, this being, which John calls the Archon, I've called it the Great Archon or the Lord Archon following the Gnostics, this being gave us its mind as our operating system, and we call that our minds. That is our quote unquote conscious mind. But it's actually the mind of the Archon. It's a borrowed operating system to let us work in this realm of individual pseudo individuality. So we are actually in a position where to get out of the grasp of this power that's draining our energy and pulling out our energy through our fragmentary bodies, we have to take back our minds. And so a lot of my work now is about helping people take back their minds and thus taking back control of their energy and their reality. There was a very fascinating uh, accident, like a happy accident, when that capstone of the conscious mind was placed on our unconscious minds, and that was it created the philosopher's child. That's the alchemical term. And in so doing, it created this magical aspect of ourselves that is not limited to either the conscious mind or the unconscious mind and can travel through space and time and can work miracles. And that's the part of us, of our personality, that is non-local. And getting out of the prison of the Archon's mind into your own power involves uniting your unconscious with your conscious minds in a very specific way, energetically, as you reclaim your power. And so I go into all of these techniques for doing just this in Get Out of Here Alive. And as you do that, you you begin to you begin to invite some of those capabilities you were alluding to earlier, Eileen, that are beyond the pale, that are quite transhuman in the best way, where we go beyond this level into some other version of being an individual consciousness.
Wow, Saul, I got to get a hold of your book. That's
Well,
really fascinating.
let me just say that it's in the pre phase, the pre-pub phase. And so right now, I don't want your money. I just want your time. I want people to just read this book and leave a review when it comes out in March on Amazon. That's my thing. So there's a download for it. You can go to saulluckman.substack.com, which is my Substack, and there's several different links there, but you'll end up being able to just download the book for free in a Kindle format and read it. And your 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 energy exchange with me is just leaving an honest review on Amazon when the book comes out in March, because that will help it get into the algorithm if I get enough positive reviews.
Yeah, good thinking. Yeah, no, I can't wait to read that. Now, is that something so people can receive the activations, right? So let's just talk a little bit about what it goes potentiation, articulation, elucidation, and
Transcension.
transcension. Is there in your new work, is there like any kind of named kind of gateway sort of when you're talking about those exercises? Like, is it a kind of a continuation of the first four?
It's not actually. I talk about the importance of the regenetics work in terms of being able to stop your energy leakage and accelerate your conscious cultivation of personal power. And So I'm giving you strategies for doing that. Some of the strategies involve doing nothing or not doing the things you've been doing that have given away your power, like stop getting in those political and religious arguments or stop, and I know you did a very fascinating video not too long ago on a similar subject, but these are things that really are designed to loose you. They take away your power. It's just a loose fest that we're living in. I wrote a book not too long ago called The World Cult and You, and I ended up creating a meme for it, and it was, exit the loose loop. I mean, stop giving away your power to people who are trying to create doomsday, right? So another thing, like, the doom scrolling that everyone is doing and paying attention to all of this negative mainstream and alternative news, or even memes a lot of the time. It's the same kind of mental programming. All of this is stuff from what I call the great parasite or the archon. These are strategies designed to divide and conquer and take away our power over and over and over again. So part of the book is just devoted to helping people return to simplicity, to getting to know their bodies better, dancing, to being creative, to getting off their own back in terms of their expectations. There's a whole chapter on the creative power in procrastination, for example, looking at some of Brenda Eulin's work. She wrote If You Want to Write many years ago, and she talked about moodling. So I get into moodling and how that can be an absolutely amazing process to just let your mind kind of wander without an agenda. So that's the not doings. But then you get into the doings, and the doings involve things like shamanic recapitulation, where you go into past memories and you heal trauma by pulling back the energy that you gave away and giving back the energy that you took, either knowingly or inadvertently. And then I get into inner alchemy techniques that are my own synthesis and distillation of a variety of similar techniques, but the one I would signal is John Kreider's work. So we're getting into energy reabsorption and how to actually pull that in. And ultimately, the goal is to pack enough energy into the cauldron area of your body. In men, we're still in the same area, right? We're really at the third chakra here, but it's right behind the belly button. It's a little spherical area about the size of a tennis ball or a baseball. In women, it's the entire womb. So that's kind of interesting that there's a much greater area to store energy in. And you have like the Castaneda shaman world talking about how women are actually much greater shamans than men, like intrinsically, because they just have more access or to power or ability to store power that they collected. So that's really, really interesting. But the idea in the inner alchemy work is that there's different ways of pulling in power, of going into the past, pulling back in trauma that disempowered you, where you're still kind of bleeding in the past, or even into the future, where you can travel into futures that you've created that are like timelines that have been engendered by your worry or your stress. And you can pull all of that energy back in and you put it down in your cauldron, and then you mentally pack it and pack it and pack it and pack it using that third aspect of yourself, that philosopher's child, that magical being. And you pack and pack and pack and pack, and eventually it begins to turn into something that starts to feel, at least energetically, like some kind of hyperdimensional piezoelectric gem, and that is the philosopher's stone.
Cool. I've never heard it referred to in that way. That's
Yeah. So when you read alchemical texts through this lens, and you look at the tria prima, the three-part recipe of alchemy, and you begin to see it with these different polarities, like the inner like the breath has all three polarities in it. So I get into teaching, breath work as well. I mean, I have a whole new thing that I'm putting out, which is called pragmalchemy, which is a combination of body work, breath work, and visualizations that's designed to help people along in this process. So you use this block called an Ouroboros, which is the serpent consuming its own tail. That's the symbol for pragmalchemy. You use this block to create myofascial decompression on different parts of your body, including in the entire area around your cauldron, to create space to let in all of the energy that you begin bringing in with your breathing and your visualizations. And then you use that visualization power to pack it in. I know I'm kind of all over the place, but I'm trying to weave several different little threads or tangents together to show that there's more than just the book. There's more than just the inner alchemy. There's also this pragmalchemy piece, which is an integrated, multitasking, energetic body work that you just do on yourself.
Wow. You know what that made me think of something that I started doing, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 months ago. At my gym, they have medicine balls, soft medicine balls, and I started taking a 25-pound medicine ball and rolling it on my abdomen and finding
Ah,
places where I had fascia binding or pain, and then just breathing into those areas and getting them to open up. And it has been, and I've opened up my whole belly area through just this regular rolling of a ball. One of the gals that's at the gym at the same time had really bad problems with constipation, and I got her doing it, and it's been really good for her. And
that,
I would
that's
say
exactly
that
along my lines. Yeah.
yeah, I would say that I would definitely, having released and opened the abdomen, because I've gotten a lot of massages and body work, but most body workers don't really go in and work the abdomen. And when we have had habits of contracting, which I certainly did from my childhood, I ended up like the runt chicken with all the feathers plucked off. And there was a lot of fascia binding and contracting all in the abdomen area. So it's interesting that you and I have both been sort of going into that whole cauldron and opening it up and creating space there.
Yeah, and another thing that I thought about relative to some of the stuff you're doing is, the slider concept and, actually getting that sound vibrating into the body more and more. So I think you could combine elements of that with elements of this pragmalchemy that I'm getting into and create extremely deep penetration into the tissues, into the fascia, the bone level. The problem with fascia is that it's like catgut, it's super strong. It's like 2,000 pounds per square inch, and it attaches to bone with that pressure. And so it pulls you left and right and forwards and backwards. And it kind of eventually, as we kind of hunch over and shorten as we age, that's what's going on. The fascia is literally just pulling us down into the ground, right?
Yep.
So you can massage all day long, you can foam roller all day long, but unless you can put enough pressure with something that has a similar density as bone into the connective tissue for long enough, which is usually a minimum of 3 minutes, you can't undo those adhesions that attach to the bone. Once you do that, then it creates all of the space. And so it also stands to reason that if you introduce sound into that area at that point in time, vibration, it's going to go much deeper. Exactly that. So I've been thinking about you in developing pragmalchemy, thinking, oh my God, here's another really fascinating interface between our worlds.
Yeah. Well, and I also do work with vocal toning, the work that I do with Isaac and Toril Korn called Sing the Body Electric. And together we've created an internal map of 42 different sounds that resonate in different areas of the body. And so I've been combining making these sounds, like the sound low resonates in the large intestine, or the sound me resonates in the small intestine. And so going in with a weighted tuning fork and sounding low from the inside while I'm working, with this on the outside,
Yes.
really just opens these things up. So I'm very curious about throwing what you're doing into the mix as well. I love multimodal,
Me
doing it from all
too.
angles.
That's one of the reasons I started developing the pragmalchemy work, because I realized I was doing all of these things in a piecemeal fashion. Like I would be doing my breathing, and then I would be doing like my visualization, and then I would be doing some body work, And I'm like, what the heck? Why can't I just put all of these together? And not only did it save me time, I realized that as it's a classic example of the whole being greater than the sum of the parts, where it actually became more powerful than what I had been doing and much more effective in shorter bursts. You can get a lot done in 5 minutes this way.
Yeah. So, what have you noticed that's different in your body and your mind and your life since you've been applying this to yourself?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. I mean, one of the goals is, and this gets kind of funny, but what you're trying to learn how to do is control your energy, which involves, and so to some extent, being the master of your mind, and that's getting out of your conscious mind and being kind of more in the intuitive mind, but being able to operate in all spheres at the same time. So because if you're constantly being loosed and you're flaring out your energy, that anything can take that from you. And then if you actually travel into the dream time, travel into the other world, like I write about in Snooze, or what Dewey Larson might call time space, or this other world, of the world of the unconscious, and you're in there with all of these other beings, these dream beings. The shamans call them allies or inorganic beings. And you're lighting up with energy because you're having emotional temper tantrums or fear bursts. They can see you and they can come and mess with you. And so you actually, learning to control that is your way of creating your own cloaking device as you swim out into the dark sea of awareness, basically.
Hmm.
So the what I've noticed is that in combining these various body work and energetic techniques with all of the regenetics work and some of the lifestyle alterations with, like, I just don't pay attention to the news anymore. I just don't. I'm sorry. I'm just not going to ever again. And I know what a succubus it is. Things like that have helped me pull away so that I feel, generally speaking, I feel more emotionally stable most of the time. I feel happier. My overall outlook is improved even over what it was, when I was finishing up the regenetics process. And that's after kind of coming through some difficult personal circumstances over the last couple years and some family stuff. So, I'm measuring that against some pretty difficult times. So I think there's something going on here. I mean, I know there is. What I'm really eager to see is how other people, how they respond to this work, because I have a very strong feeling that it will just make people feel so much better in their bodies and their moods. All of this, I mean, all doing all the fascial work by itself, I mean, can have immeasurable impact, positive impacts on hormone levels, and it can help people lose weight and all of the stuff, just doing the type of body work that I'm talking about, this decompression of the fascia. But when you combine it with the breathing, which helps breathe life into those areas and then take out toxins and traumas from those areas. And then you combine that with visualizing and bringing in energy and filling those areas with chi or prana, then it's quite amazing.
Yeah, and that visualization really works. I mean, a lot of my work, my group work, or my Sonic Sundays, is very much a combination of sound, of breath, and of visualizing, and drawing light in and building the light body. And it's very powerful. And in that realm of that kind of energy, it absolutely is real and produces real results.
Absolutely. I mean, what I argue in this book is that ultimately there is only awareness, that we don't just live in a world that is somehow quantum or that has very small whirling pieces to the puzzle. We live in a world that is based in the observer effect, that the observer effect not is not just an aspect of the world, it to be understood as what brings the world into being.
Yeah.
So we have to learn the the tools and strategies for mastering the creative power of our attention because if we don't master it, it will be mastered for us. This is the way it works. This is definitely a predatorial ecosystem, and you can see that in politics, but I'm also talking about energetically. So the idea of mastering attention and mastering um, how you apply that through your imagination is of paramount importance for any free-thinking spiritual seeker. Let's just put it that way.
Hmm. Yeah, it's so interesting. What's coming to mind is the difference between a good egg from a local farm that's been outside and fresh and no GMO feed versus like a commercially produced egg, and how the shell of a good egg is much stronger, right? And the everything and the yolk is much more orange. Um, what you're talking about, right, is this movement into being a really good egg, really, because I think a big part of not being a victim of the loosh farming is having really good, strong membrane and boundaries, and not allowing this sort of leakage or flare outs or fire ups or any of those things, but being really contained and having a nice, like, solid sunny center are super important. And it sounds like the exercises that you're talking about and where it brings you, it really does make you a good egg. That's what
I
that's the
love that. Yeah,
mind.
yeah, because I mean, I grew up on a farm, so I can remember getting the good eggs back in the day, and then I can remember when the eggs changed, and really what had changed was the farming, the whole terrain and the way they were being produced. And then getting back into organics and stuff, I learned what was going on and how to assess, the quality of an egg based on, just almost you can just feel it. You can kind of knock your knuckles against it and feel how strong the membrane is in a good organic egg. So absolutely, that's exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I love that. Well, I also have a third book. Well, you've written a
Oh,
number of books,
now I
Saul.
was going to ask where you are in your writing process.
Yeah. So I've been working on an interesting little book that started coming to me last April that is called The Stabilizing Statements. And it doesn't have a subtitle yet. It's very simple and it'll be pretty short. But what it came from was the realization that the amount of pressure in the world has really been increasing, right? The time pressure, the money pressure, eggs have gotten so expensive, and social pressure and political pressure. And so when we have a sense of pressure on us, it literally sort of squashes down your biofield. And that becomes fractal to all the membranes in your body, which kind of squish. And when we are under pressure, and we squish, we tend to do what I call come out sideways, which is basically making loosh, where we lose our
Wow.
temper or we get irritable or we get weepy or over dramatic, or we just basically start spewing out emotion, and it's usually inappropriate in some way or another. And and so what we really need is something to help keep us like really on axis so that we don't bow to this pressure and come out sideways. And in the Biofield anatomy map, I list all the imbalances on each side of the body. But what I realized was that this central channel and this idea of staying on axis needed to be shored up. And so I created 25 different statements to go in each side of the central channel that are stabilizing, that are shoring up. For example, like the first one that came to me was the sacral area, coming back to that, um, where I've observed that the imbalance on the left side is the generation of feelings of frustration, uh, disappointment, resistance, fussiness, often over a sense of our own unmet needs and also not being heard, which kind of relates up to this side. And so what it is it's a belief basically that your needs aren't met, that they're not gonna be met. And so the stabilizing statement on for the left sacral zone is my needs are met. And then the right side imbalance is a feelings of I'm not good enough, this sort of unworthy story that plagues humanity that I've really come to see as a mind virus, that at the
Yeah.
kernel of everyone's dysfunction, whether it's physical, mental, emotional, is some kind of story of not good enough. And that creates a resistance to letting in. There's also guilt and shame tend to pile up over here. The sense of an inner critic that's telling us all the ways that we're not good enough and shaming us. And so sometimes people try to counter that feeling with the phrase, I am enough, but I really don't like that phrase. So I changed it to, I am plenty. And so the sacral goes from like, I'm frustrated that my needs aren't met and I'm never good enough into my needs are met and I am plenty. And from that, I create, right? The sacral center is one of creativity. And when we create from a place where we're not in lack and we're not in low self-worth, then that's what we get back, right? Because life is a mirror, it's a reflection. Whatever vibe we're putting out is being reflected to us. And so the statements just go through the body like that. And as we affirm these different statements, like I got hung up in a couple places myself because the statement of the right hip, the root is I play. And the other side is I work. I work, I play, and then a center one emerges from that. And the root is I work, I play, yay. And it's like the root speaks of like the excitement of being human, of having a body, of, yeah, I got to make my bed and make sure I have food and make sure I have a roof overhead, but then I can go play music or I can dance or I can, right? I
Yeah.
can do all the fun things about being human. So yay. And for me, and I think for many, many people, and Saul, this relates to your writing story as well, it has been I work and I work. And so I was like, do I play? Like, how do I play? What ways do I play? I asked my son, I was like, Cassidy, what are my hobbies? And he said, research. And then I asked my husband, I was like, what do you think I'm going to do when I retire? And he said, work. So,
Great.
so I've had to kind of take my own medicine in this process of writing this little book. But what it does is it brings up, when you say a statement, it brings up all the false beliefs that you're harboring that think that that's not true. And it's we even developed a Biofield tuning session with it, getting people to say the statements and tuning in particular areas. And it's oddly liberating in a very short amount of time. And when you work with them, and I've created little recordings, 5-minute tunings to go with each one. When you work with them and you say these statements, and it brings you into this beautiful alignment. And then the top one, the crown, I'm still working on exactly how the phrasing for that goes, but it's essentially my will is one with God, or I am one with God, or I am in this unity consciousness, so that you are really open to all of that potential and staying upright and not coming out sideways. So it sounds like it would be a perfect companion to your book, actually, for people to do
Absolutely. I
together.
was thinking as you were sharing that, A, it's fascinating, and B, I would love to read it. And if you would like me to, provide some kind of editorial review that you can use in your marketing efforts or for your publisher, just let me know. I'd be happy to do that. And I know that Lee would like it too, so it'd be fun to share it with her if I could have permission to do that.
Yeah.
Just because this
Well, I
is
plan on
stuff
finishing the
her out.
first draft this week, so I will absolutely send you, be one of the people to get my first draft to get some feedback on that.
One of
Yeah.
the things I'm doing that I've put out that people have responded to pretty well is doing a promotion swap with authors, and so I'm doing that with some other people already, and basically it involves just providing a short review of someone's book and putting that on my platform, with for my audience, and then people will do that with my book as well. And this can be simultaneous or non-simultaneous. So if one, if somebody has a book that's going to be out a year from now or whatever, that can always happen then to help with marketing efforts. But a lot of people, even in the mainstream publishing world, have started doing this kind of borrowing other people's audiences as a wonderful way of jump starting their book. So if you're ever interested in doing something like that, just let me know.
Yeah, that sounds great. Well,
'Cause
I'm
I would
so
enjoy, getting down in it, doing a review, and then I like to share things, so it would be really fun to share what you're up to. I just read Miguel Connor's The Occult Elvis, and he and I are doing one of these, and he's published through Intertraditions. And it was absolutely fascinating, but it was just so much fun. But I can't wait because I can't even I've already done the review and I've done my little promo and everything, but I have to sit on it till February because his book doesn't come out until April. Yeah.
nice.
I like
Okay.
the networking. It's fun. It's something I don't do enough of probably, but when I do it, I really enjoy it.
Yeah, we're really lucky to have a lot of peers who I certainly have many friends who are intertraditions authors. I have many friends who are authors in general, and I feel like there's so many of us here in the world right now doing interesting research and turning up fascinating stuff and helping a lot with people on their journey to understanding life and achieving that sort of inner liberation that I think we're all looking for.
Absolutely. I wanted to ask you when your book how will it be published? Is it going to come out through your publisher? Or are you going to put it out yourself? Or what is your vision?
Yeah, we're gonna self-publish it because it's a workbook because even though it's short, it packs a lot into into it. It's highly distilled. And so it requires reflection because each time you say a statement, I use the metaphor that it's like if you have a glass of water that has sand in the bottom, the statements are like pouring more water in, and all the things that are against it that want to protest, they're like the sand that comes up. And so when you sit down and you say that and you do the exercise of bringing your awareness into your right hip and speaking, I am plenty, some kind of protest is going to come up. And so it's actually going to be a spiral bound book with a workbook. It's going to be a workbook because I absolutely want people to write down all of the things that come up in protest so that they can see them, so that they come out. So we're going to self-publish it. And I'm also going to make it into an audiobook that I have a recording studio so I can make that
Oh,
myself.
that's great. I'm very excited. I have a big hit on this project.
Yeah, it feels really important to me, and as I've grown a team as time has gone on, I think I've gotten lazier and lazier around my ability to put my butt in a chair and really crank something out. I have that kind of like Libra lazy tendency to just like, oh, it's a nice day, I'm going for a hike, kind of thing. But this has really felt like, no, I really got to sit down and I got to get this done. And just this week, I'm finally have the right kind of vibe to get the first draft finished up. So it feels good and it does feel important. And I feel like what you're doing is important. Because the end of the day, I think I don't have much more time, but I do want to tell this story because it's really about I think what our task is that's in front of us. And there was an original Star Trek episode where they ended up getting boarded by these unseen entities that sort of hijacked the minds of people and caused them to start brawling. And there were fights breaking out all over the place and arguments, and there was all of this drama going on. And Spock figured out that good spirits were in order, and he got everybody to stop fighting and start laughing and like engaging in jocularity. They put on music and they're singing and dancing, and it was everyone's lifted spirits of being, you know, full of light and full of good cheer that dispelled the entity from feeding off their negativity.
Right on.
Right. And I think that this is, you know, this is where we need, just like you said, we need more dancing, we need more singing, we need more play, we need more good spirits, and stopping the doom scrolling and the fear porn absorbing and the emotional responding, and really you know, partying like it's the end of the world, I think.
Absolutely. Like it's 1999. Yeah,
Yeah.
totally agree. That's definitely where I'm coming from. I ultimately, even though I go into kind of weird, dark territory because of the structure of this so-called reality, my message is super empowering. It's that we individually have the ability to, you know, to blow this popsicle stand if we want to, and collectively we do have the power to change it. I'm not necessarily putting my money on that outcome because that's like putting the cart before the horse. I'm really working on myself and I'm pursuing my own hero's journey. But I do think there is the potential for a more of a collectivized hero's journey where enough people begin coming together. Like in this new book, I imagine what it would be like for a lot of these inner alchemists pulling away the power from the great parasite to really come together and just disempower it totally to where it just goes away, because you can actually do that on an individual level. Eventually, you can develop so much power that it will just leave you alone.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And if we can do that at an individual level and we all work in it, I believe it's possible to do it on a collective level as well. And I'm an unapologetic idealist. So I'm gonna stand by
That's
that
great.
possibility. Maybe not in our lifetime, but I've seen through my work with tuning forks this ability to really purify the system, to strengthen the boundary, to stay safe, if you will, or just unattractive to the parasite mind, right? I definitely I believe that, and I believe that the tools and the techniques to do this are populating all over the place right now, that people are like you and I and others are figuring it out.
It's true. It's true. And I think there's a level of resistance. I went through 3 interviews about this book, well, two and a half really, that didn't take. The first interviewer, I think maybe he died. He's gone. He just disappeared. And the second one was with Pete Evans down in the chef Pete Evans down in Australia, this amazing guy. We had this beautiful chat, and then it didn't record. You know, it's just this kind of thing.
Right.
It is what one runs into when you're actually over the target where the great parasite, or I also call it the dragon, is concerned.
Yeah. Yeah, but you know, we carry on anyway. I mean, I think that's the game, right? Of course, of course, the adversaries and the difficulty, and as we level up in the game and start to figure stuff out, that's just the way that it works. But we're clever humans.
We are we are clever. That's exactly right. And as we begin to bring that conscious mind, that kind of I hesitate to use right brain, left brain, but the conscious mind is sort of like the left brain in a way, and then the right brain would be more like the unconscious mind in some ways. As we begin to put those together, we can route all this power into our waking world that is derived from the unconscious realm. And that's where the rubber really meets the road.
Yeah, yeah, that's exciting. All right, well, that's a conversation for us to have in the future, Saul. I really have enjoyed this conversation, and I would love to do it again. I feel like there's still so many things that you and I can talk about that are of interest to our collective audiences. So,
Me too. Well, what we should do, if you're up for it, is just read these new books that we've both written and come together on the other side of it, because I bet we'll have so many things to talk about. I know we will. Of course we
yeah,
will.
yeah, that's perfect. That sounds like a plan. I will go download your book and I'll send you a copy of mine very soon.
Okay, that's awesome. Well, listen, thank you so much for making time for this discussion. I've really wanted to have it for a long time, and I don't know why it's taken us this long. It seems kind of dumb, but I'm glad we finally did it.
Yeah, and more to come. Excellent. All right, thank you.
Ciao, ciao.